shots together. Anyway, Aaron,
I'll work on that.
yeah. And Aaron, what's on your mind?
Well, Max, I'd love to hear what you witnessed today. I think it's really appropriate that we started off talking about Julian Assange because Assange has documented around the world
There we are.
mob violence and acts of terror that the U.S. does to countries around the world. So it was fitting today to see this in the heart of the empire, sort of the chickens coming home to roost in a way. And
Absolutely.
and of course, just the importance of the Assange story and the fact that so few outlets are giving it the respect that it deserves. And Kevin is one of these people who's like almost single-handedly in the U.S. kept the story alive and kept people informed. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad that
thanks to the Intercept, which refused to allow him to contribute reporting from Old Bailey.
That's right. They did not enlist his services, which is one of many bad decisions we could say about the Intercept. But listen, Max, so I'd love to hear, you wrote the book Republican Gomorrah, which very early on warned about the far right direction that the Republican Party was going in. Today, I thought was the apotheosis of that. I just want to hear about what you witnessed today at the Capitol and your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I don't know if what I saw was anything like what I witnessed while covering the Christian right and their support for George W. Bush, someone everyone hates who went out to the Capitol today. I mean, I'll just tell you what I saw with as little opinion as possible. And then we can get into what I think of what took place. And Anya has some thoughts as well. And I think we can talk about the parallels in the way that this is understood to the way that Venezuela and Ukraine and other targets of U.S. regime change are understood. But what I saw, I went out there because, I mean, this is my city. I grew up here. I now live like 15 minutes from the Capitol. And I just went up there, not totally knowing what to expect. And I've never seen anything like this. It was totally remarkable. When I got up there, they had just entered these, there were about, I don't know, 10, 15,000 people in front of the Capitol. And I didn't even bother with them. I went to the back of the Capitol where protesters had basically broke in and they had gone into the offices of members of Congress. And as I approached the door, there was Capitol Police, pepper spraying people, and a guy runs out with his hand covered in blood. And he said, they shot her in the neck. And I just started asking people what happened. And all these people are crying, running out. And they say they shot her. And a young woman had been shot in the neck, apparently with live bullets. And for whatever reason, I was trying to maybe tweet out the video of it. I walked down the Capitol steps, walked to the side of the Capitol. And for whatever reason, I happened to be right in the path of a stretcher coming out with a young woman. They're pumping her heart, trying to keep her alive. Blood is pouring off of the stretcher. Ben, you can even show some video of this that I tried to film, and I follow them. As I tried to film her to show her lethal injury, she was killed. Police officer with an automatic weapon pushes me back. So this leads to calls for revenge. People are like chanting "fuck the police," which is what, you would normally hear "fuck 12" at a BLM rally. People are calling the police traitors. Like, we thought you were on our side. And this, just leads to a massive escalation, where basically it took hours before the riot police even showed up. And what was behind that? Well, I think that the police and the Proud Boys had always just kind of gotten along for the most part, and the police treated them with kid gloves. And so they left it up to the Capitol Police. And I don't know what happened. I don't want to jump the gun, but it seems like a cop got frightened. And I actually found some cops who were trapped in the Capitol basement later on who were afraid to even come out and were involved in some kind of hostage negotiation with the crowd outside. And the Capitol Police just got jumpy. I had heard from someone who witnessed it that the woman was with a group that was trying to break down Mitch McConnell's door. And she was killed. Back the blue. That's what they always chanted, back the blue. But then I saw these open confrontations with the police where people were just openly hectoring cops, condemning them. And I went around trying to ask people, well, why can't you understand why people would protest police brutality in this? in this city, like in my own neighborhood, a young man named Dion K was killed for simply possessing a unregistered handgun, and all these people are for gun rights. He was shot in the back by a jump out cop from MPD while running away, and they could not give me a coherent answer. They could not give me a coherent answer. But some people would start saying, well, I totally understand that, and I'm not totally against BLM doing that. And then someone would jump in and start cutting in and saying, that's ridiculous. What are you saying? So, but basically, there was just a lot of political incoherence, just complete anger there at the government. The anger really was just about the whole system and Congress itself. It wasn't necessarily about the election at certain points. And people by the end were saying, this is beyond Trump. Trump is even betraying us. And some of the diehard Trumpers were trying to come out and calm people down. Getting close to 6 o'clock, I went back to the front of the Capitol, where most of the crowd was, and the police began tear gassing them, hitting them with flashbangs. It was completely remarkable to see that at the end of the Trump era, police defending the Capitol with force against a pro-Trump mob. And there's a lot to say about that, but those are some of the scenes that I witnessed today.
Do we know who shot this woman who died? Because there were reports, and it's documented that at least some of these Proud Boys even shot inside the Capitol after they got in.
Yeah, I can't confirm, but everyone was saying Capitol Police. So I'm just saying what I was told.
Right.
It would make sense. I saw there was video of a cop with his weapon right after she was shot. For all I know, I wouldn't be surprised if there was an attempt to kind of run interference for the police and create all of these alternative scenarios, as they do with young Black men who were killed. And I would not support that. I'm actually a little bit, I want to know what happened. If the Proud Boys were shooting at cops and the cops responded, well, yeah, then there's a scenario. But there's a scenario that would explain it. But didn't some member of Congress go on TV and say there must be a justification for shooting her?
Yeah, I was watching C-SPAN, and I forget the name of the congressperson, but they were a Democrat from Texas who basically just said, oh, if the cops acted, there had to have been a reason. And I mean, they were storming the Capitol. So by that logic, I don't know if he's saying that they should have all been gunned down, but I don't personally take that position. I think that would have caused a disaster. And you hear a lot of people saying online right now, like, oh, we would have been gunned down if we tried that. But I think what was demonstrated today is that it's really unfortunate that it's these crazy right wingers who are taking the storm of the people's house, the Congress. I saw a lot of people,
storming the Bastille.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of Congress people and of the commenters I saw on C-SPAN were just shocked that something like this could ever happen, that that average people or people that weren't in government could storm this Capitol building. This is something we could have never imagined. Well, I think this is honestly just the beginning. And if the right can do it, imagine if there was actually a movement for something with concrete demands like healthcare, or I mean, that's what I think right now we need, is some sort of occupation of the Capitol. And that's how I would see like something such as force the vote being more successful, is if people were able to move in massive amounts and claim that space. I mean, it's insane to watch these images of people sitting in Nancy Pelosi's desk or standing at the speaker's chair in the House of Representatives, standing in the Capitol, these powerful places. It was a startling image, and I think it's valuable for the people of this country to see that something like that can even happen here. And then there was certainly a cathartic element, I think, for different friends that I have from around the world who were saying, I mean, everybody said it on Twitter, that this is something that the United States encourages in other capitals, but now it's coming home. As Aaron said, chicken's coming home to roost. But I mean, imagine if we had a massive movement with concrete demands storming the Capitol. Maybe things could turn out a little differently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not calling for anything in particular, but why is it that I mean, this is counter-revolutionary energy on the right, but and this was not a revolution, although they were calling for revolution explicitly. What passes for the left in the US is so scared of anything that remotely relates to revolutionary talk, and they're so wedded to the system that is failing everyone that it's so hard to imagine anything like this. And their response to this is pathetic. And when I was there, I managed to talk to a lot of people there were just some people who were just so far gone in their right-wing ideology that there was no speaking to them. It was just like Trump 2016, the professional activists, the racists, the white supremacists. And there were so many young people who were just lost, confused, lone wolf type guys who finally, for the first time in their lives, were tear gassed. And for the first time in their lives, saw the cops gun someone down, assuming the cops did that. I'm going to take that back if the cops didn't do it. And to actually engage them on those questions, they didn't have answers. I would say, do you still back the blue? Some of them would say, I haven't backed the blue in a long time, meaning I don't support the cops anymore. Some of them were just so upset at the cops. But why is it that these people are pitted against the other group that's protesting the police and supposedly protesting the system, and they demonize one another? Well, I mean, it's obvious. And I would even ask people that, and they'd say, it's the media. And I'd say, yes, it's the media. But then they would start demonizing Antifa or BLM or however they understood the left as China, Chi-Com, Chi-Nazi, Chinese controlled communists. The brainwashing power was so extreme. But, Anya's right. This is just the beginning. The Biden era is going to be an absolute disaster. And I've never seen anything like this, but I assume we're going to see something like this again. And all of those liberals who have, it's obviously not their fault that any of this happened necessarily, but all of those liberals on Capitol Hill who have those hate has no home here signs on their lawns, who say that they're part of this resistance, who've been waiting for Vindman or whoever to impeach Trump. I didn't see any of them out today. None of them pushed back against this. And none of them held up a mirror to it. None of them even came out with their phones and asked tough questions. None of them came out to have conversations with people that were critical. Nothing. They just hid. So what they call hate came home, and they stayed home. So there's absolutely, and the police handled them with kid gloves. This is going to happen again. And then you see the force the vote conversation, all these opportunistic, fake.
We're going to talk more about that with Danny. So you might want to.
Yeah, but okay, I'll say my comment, but I want to make this point. They are scared of even putting pressure on progressive representatives. They're just scared of even putting internet pressure on. These are people who stormed the offices of representatives. I covered the Tea Party for years, Aaron. They have been doing this for years. They have been scaring the hell out of the Republicans, and especially the rhinos, the Republicans in name only, in order to get their agenda across. And it's been working. They've moved the Republican Party towards their agenda. Who's moving the Democrats? A bunch of corporate lobbyists who break into their offices. Lobbyists break into Democrat offices.
They don't need to break in. They're welcomed in their offices.
Oh yeah, and by the way, AOC,
chocolates
she
and
spent all week
roses.
accusing Jimmy Dore of being violent, and then this happened. Jimmy Dore didn't break into anyone's office, AOC.
No, I mean, I was gonna make the exact same point that you have so many people who call themselves socialists or democratic socialists because they want to separate themselves from the socialists everywhere else in the global South, but they call themselves socialists and they won't even criticize Nancy Pelosi. Well, I mean, let's be real. These insane Trumpists, I mean, I'm not endorsing this, but they are calling for Trump to execute Mike Pence. like these so-called democratic socialists won't even criticize the neoliberal leaders of the Democratic Party, while Trump's hardcore fans are calling for calling for firing squads to take out leaders of the Republican Party. I mean, it's just like what is going on? But I also want to acknowledge here a great comment. Thank you so much from Sadida26. I propose all of us going to Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/GrayZone or patreon.com/ModerateRebels. It really does mean a lot. And I'll jump in. I'll add something to this conversation really quickly here because Max mentioned that there's been a lot of people on Twitter pointing out that the kind of far right extremists right now in DC, basically, I mean, they're calling for a coup. It's explicitly what they're calling for. they have these kinds of same far right extremists have bipartisan support in foreign nations when the U.S. government wants regime change. So Alex Rubinstein, a friend of ours, contributor to the GrayZone, he has this image here from Ukraine, and I mean, in Ukraine, the same kind of people we see. I mean, not everyone involved in these protests in D.C. is a Nazi, but in the Ukrainian protests, likewise, not everyone was a Nazi, but the muscle behind the 2014 coup in Ukraine, the really violent forces that, with the support of the United States and Western European countries, successfully overthrew the government, were these Nazi forces. And you can also point out, I mean, in Syria, in Libya, in so many countries, I mean, it's these far-right extremist forces are the muscle behind coups. In Bolivia, it was these kind of fascist shock troops that we see now that the U.S. supported. So, you know, I'm not in any way justifying what they're doing, but, you know, you can't help but point out the kind of ironic, poetic justice that the Democrats have supported these same, I mean, and the Republicans, it goes without saying, but the Democrats as well have supported these same far-right forces when their official enemy countries in Hong Kong and Nicaragua and Venezuela. And this is what it looks like at home, unfortunately. It should cause for introspection.
Yeah. Sorry, Annie, go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in super quickly to read a statement for the Venezuelan government actually released. It's on my Twitter, Ben, if you want to pull it up. But they actually said, this is from the foreign ministry, with this unfortunate episode, the U.S. suffers that which it generates in other countries with its policy of aggression. Venezuela hopes that the American people can forge a new path towards stability and social justice.
Well, I love this line here. I have it up. It's in Spanish, but this is Jorge Orreaza, who's the foreign minister, and he says that Venezuela condemns the political polarization in the people of the United States, which is so funny because if you listen to U.S. rhetoric or read mainstream corporate media outlets, they often condemn the political polarization in Venezuela, as if Venezuela is a uniquely polarized country. Masterful trolling. A+.
The point I wanted to stress is that today is a reminder that we are a failed state. We don't provide for people's basic needs. There's a long history of unaddressed racism and white supremacy. We spend, trillions of dollars colonizing countries around the world, and that has huge impacts, not just on those countries, but on this country as well, with the people that are sent off to die and are traumatized by the acts they carry out in foreign wars. And so on the right, you've seen Trump channel all this into this incoherent rage and racism like we saw today and have seen many times. But then on the liberal side, all the energy is spent basically trying to neutralize any type of effective response. And the main manifestation of that throughout the Trump era has been to blame everything about Trump on Russia instead of looking at systemic dysfunction in this country and the failures of the neoliberals that gave us Trump. And what was amazing on a day like today, when Trump really is responsible for what happened today. He incited all this with his insane, deranged or election fraud stunt. He encouraged people to come. Even when they started getting violent, it took a long time for him to put out a statement. And even when he did, he still talked about how much he loves everybody. So today was a perfect day to point out just how unhinged Trump is. But Democrats couldn't resist doubling down on the Russia mania. So I put out a tweet of some of it, Ben. I don't know if you have it, but Ben Rhodes, Obama's foreign policy whiz, he says this is the day that Vladimir Putin has waited for since he had to leave East Germany as a young KGB officer at the end of the Cold War. Then there is Robert Reich, former labor secretary, principled person, good progressive. He's done some very admirable things. Putin won, he says. Greg Miller of the Washington Post, Putin, forever scarred by humiliating scenes of the Soviet Union's collapse, must see what is happening in the U.S. Capitol today as utter triumph. And finally, Joyce Vance of MSNBC, of course, today is a good day for Vladimir Putin. So even at this moment, or politically, I mean, from a point of view of like narrow political calculations, you can do a lot here to just expose how incredibly insane and deranged Trump and the Republican Party is, Democrats still can't resist because they're so attached to this self-comforting and also imperial narrative that they still have to make it about Vladimir Putin. Like every time I'm still shocked by it, even though of course I shouldn't be.
Yeah, and there's another classic one right here that I'm going to get up from Michael McFaul, who is former U.S. ambassador to Russia. This is
McPhail.
also a guy. Yeah, Michael McPhail. Keep in mind, this guy is portrayed as an intellectual. He teaches at Stanford University. He also writes for the Washington Post. Trump today delivered his latest, but hopefully his last gift to Putin. No president in the history of the U.S. has ever done so much damage. I mean, that's all they can say at this point. I mean, it's just like it's like the record was already skipping years ago, and then the record just like flew off and decapitated someone. I mean, it's just so comical and ridiculous at this point.
Michael McFaul blocked me on Twitter 2 years ago for calling him Ambassador McPhail because he said he tolerates a lot, but he doesn't tolerate name calling. But
he cheered. Remember when Evo fled Bolivia and he said, "Great, this is great news."
Yep.
So he'll tolerate fascist military coups abroad, but won't tolerate being called McPhail.
Yeah, and thinks they're bad when it's in Washington, D.C. Getting back to what Aaron said about being a failed state, it's honestly, we were just in Venezuela and people were asking us, like, why aren't the people of the United States rising up more? Like, what is it going to take for you guys to pressure some change or force some change from your government and in your government? And honestly, after this COVID experience, people should be storming the Capitol. It shouldn't be to keep Trump in power, because that's really the sad thing, is you hear all these people out there today, and I heard them on Max's stream and on C-SPAN saying that they were there for Trump because Trump, he spoke to their needs and he kept his promises. I don't know what promises he kept to them or what. I mean, these people are definitely brainwashed, but say what you want about Trump, he does have this base of people that were willing to go out there and do this for him. I just wish that someone on the left, someone who represented not a border wall and increased militarization, but someone who represented access to housing and healthcare and education, would do the same thing and say, look, this is the people's house. This is your city, your government. I have to go up against a lot within the Congress to defeat the corporate agenda and actually get things like healthcare and housing put on the table. But help me show up, like make Nancy Pelosi scared and actually force not just a symbolic vote, but an actual passing of legislation, or, I mean, chase them out, replace them with actual people in the government. I just think people should be storming the Capitol, and that there should be clear demands. There should be an agenda, and that there's going to be more of this kind of opportunity under the future Biden administration, if the first weeks leading into it are any signal.
Yeah, I tweeted earlier, this reporter Adam Serwer from MSNBC, who's like, the quintessential kind of liberal intelligentsia guy, wrote, "If they get away with this, it will be worse next time, I promise you." And I tweeted, well, how many liberal Biden voters who live blocks away with "hate has no home here" signs on their neatly tended laws came out to confront Stop the Steal? Absolutely none that I saw. And I'm getting ratioed by like resistance liberals. Ben, you're quick, man. And by the way, everybody hit the like button so the algorithm doesn't take us out. That really helps. Yeah.
Hit the like button on YouTube, he means. Like the thumbs up on YouTube.
Yeah, the thumbs up on YouTube. You can look at all of the responses from blue check marks. People are really mad at me. They're like furious that I said this. They're furious. Yeah, you would have called them deep state crisis actors. Like, no, actually, like they want to defend the Capitol. Like, there are members of Congress in there who had to be evacuated. Why didn't they come out and like defend these people that they worship? Why didn't they come out and defend the process? They just created the context for this to happen again. And there are so many more of them than there were of these right wingers. So they just like, it shows how like they always call the manager. They're the ultimate Karens. They always call on the authorities, and they themselves sit home and do nothing. They've been turned into spectators, and they don't actually believe anything can change. So they've created this cult of celebrity around various liberal figures. Maybe it's AOC, maybe it's Anthony Fauci, but they sort of seek to live vicariously through them and want these symbolic displays, but none of them do anything. I mean, I didn't even see them out there like filming or critically engaging with people. One guy came out and critically engaged with people, and he was left alone, and he almost got physically attacked. But if there were many more people, maybe even if they just had their own counter protest, honestly, like there were buses that had to pull up to evacuate members of Congress with DC police. And if a pro-Trump mob had wanted to attack members of Congress, they could have easily gotten away with that. And there was no one out there from the other side to defend what they claim to believe in. Like, I don't understand why my take is so offensive.
Well, Max, let me ask you, you covered the Black Lives Matter protests back in the summer in DC. How does the police presence compare from then to today?
Well, I said before, I mean, the police presence was not what you would have expected from a Black Lives Matter protest based on the June 1st rally last year against the basically murder of George Floyd on camera, which I was at. I mean, they brought Black Hawk helicopters, National Guard Black Hawk helicopters. They had members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff out on the street calling for, dominating the battle space. Donald Trump was, obviously one of the most iconic scenes of his presidency, him holding a Bible in front of the church at Lafayette Square Park and tear gassing protesters in order for him to do that photo op. And the police tear gassed the protesters. That was the Park Police. They do SWAT. They actually did a no-knock raid a few years ago on my street for like handguns, and they had a helicopter over our house. So they're used to treating poor Black people like this and people who come out for poor Black people. Then they brought out the National Guard. Today, I watched the police, the first, round of reinforcements come in, and they did not have beanbag rounds. They did not have tear gas. They did not have shields. They just had batons, and they had body armor. And it took about an hour and a half for them to bring in the real riot squad. And it looked like sheriffs and some members of the National Guard. And they weren't prepared for this. And I think it was ideological, I have to assume, because the police and the Proud Boys have this quiet relationship under the table. And the Proud Boys they chant "Back the Blue." They salute the police. I saw them fraternizing with protesters behind the Capitol, like just acting like they were pals. And I think that's why this was able to take place. It was also able to take place because the right wing doesn't give a fuck. They don't ratio people for saying you should be out in the streets.
Yeah, so I guess that's my point. Like, I don't fault liberals for not confronting the Proud Boys. I think that for me, the main takeaway from today in terms of the police is that, like, how is it that you're sending in this, brigade to confront Black Lives Matter protests, but in the face of this organized, heavily white supremacist protest, it was so lax, and you let like a couple of thousand Capitol Hill police officers there to defend against a huge mob that they knew was coming at the encouragement of the president. I mean, that is like, and
I fault them. I fault them because we know what the police are about. So I fault them. And they say that, Black Lives Matter and all this, but they don't come out and do anything. They leave it to the police who shoot Black people. So I definitely fault those liberals, and they're ratioing me, and there's no coherent argument in that thread.
Trump started his presidency with his law and order inauguration address. I just think it says a lot that this is how it ends. And then also, I don't know what people think about the fact that Trump gave this big speech and ordered his supporters to go down to the Capitol, but then the minute things got out of hand, he tweeted to say, like, obey the police, we are the law and order crowd. If that you heard people actually saying they felt like Trump had abandoned them after he did that?
Yes. Yes. I mean, people were saying this is beyond Trump. And obviously they were saying Mike Pence was controlled by China. So
And here's where, see, seeing all these people, they've all fallen for Trump's deranged conspiracy theories, the thing about the Dominion voting machines, and Venezuelan, like Venezuela being involved in the rigging of the election and Chinese money and all this stuff. And, everyone is condemning it, and it's fine. It's good to condemn it. But then I have to think about, and I have to wonder to what extent this plays into people's outrage. Is like, if you're someone who voted for Trump, and then you saw for 4 years Democrats blame Russia for it and actually say that Trump was a Russian agent. And you had someone like Adam Schiff literally read the Steele dossier into the congressional record. Literally, he like all these crazy claims in the Steele dossier about like Carter Page getting bribed with, or making a bribe arrangement with a Russian oil giant to lift sanctions, and Michael Cohen visiting Prague. Adam Schiff read that into the congressional record, and there was even a sprawling special counsel investigation based on these wild conspiracy theories. So that was like the sort of liberal, elegant way of pursuing a very damaging conspiracy theory in a bid to undermine an election. But that's been so normalized, and instead, the only conspiracy theories that we make fun of are the ones that come on the Trump side, because they're said. I mean, they are so ludicrous and unhinged. So how can you not? But what I'm worried about is like this prevailing double standard, and the fact that since there will be no accountability at the elite level for Russiagate, how that will factor into further resentment from all these Trump folks who feel as if the system has been stacked against them. Like the refusal to account for the liberal conspiracy theory will only, compound the impact of Trump's conspiracy theories, as it looks like he's not going anywhere in terms of his like public brand. He's positioning himself to stick around, I think, for a long time.
I just think, the Russiagate narrative shows, and what we're seeing today with all those tweets. I mean, you look at Ben Rhodes' tweet, it's like, how is this not a joke? And like the dissonance that I'm experiencing when I say, why didn't people come out and defend the Capitol if you revere this place so much? It just shows how out of touch they are with everything that's going on in the country and how deeply invested they are in this system that's failed everyone. It's all about defending the system down to the State Department. And it's why the whole impeachment saga was geared not around anything Trump did at the border, for example, or corruption. It was geared around the most elite elements of the national security state. They defined that narrative. And their whole narrative is about defending a failed system. So whether we disagree with these right-wing mobs, who are some of the most brainwashed people I've ever encountered, and I've been, covering them for years, whether we disagree with that or not, they're responding to a complete systemic failure. Aaron, you were right that we are a failed state. And they're just whistling past the graveyard with Putin. It's just absolutely absurd. The sad thing is no one was talking about Russiagate or saying, oh yeah, this new Cold War they're trying to distract us with. They're trying to ramp up Chinagate. Their brains have been so hacked.
Yeah.
Their brains are so filled with COVID viral load that or it's like Chinagate viral load, that all they talked about was like, you are China, you are Chi-Com, like the cops are China, Congress is China, we are living in CCP controlled territory. That was, everywhere I went, people were saying that. So that's what's next. They're going to try to Chinagate Biden.
And to the point where they're even recycling Russiagate conspiracy theories. So just last week, the Trump White House put out this thing about how China is paying bounties